And I was wondering if you could talk about that and how do we best, go, push forward from that, from the activist side or from the government side. Is that supporting the SRF? Is that supporting the New Dawn Charter? Why is the U.S. government not really talking about that? Why is the international community not talking about that? And in the DRC, like, what would that look like? And best practices for future, situations, but also specifically in Sudan. Thanks.
Okay, great. Boy, this is going to be a very big challenge you have set up here, but I'll try my best.
I'm settling in, don't worry.
Academia, really, I don't know of any time that where we have started and begun working on things where it wasn't heavily weighted in a good way with the work of or the participation of folks in academic community who have, many of whom dedicated their entire professional lives to the issues that they're teaching about and know far more than any of the folks that are sort of in the activist world, and they may not be as let's charge down the hill kind of rah-rah as some of the, but they can bring such a multiplicity or a depth of experience and knowledge that you'd be foolhardy as folks who are focused on a particular issue not to involve people with that experience. So I don't have any, in my limited amount of experience, don't have any memory of working on any of the things we've talked about inside and outside government. And when I was inside, by the way, we'd have these, you weren't allowed to have a standing academic advisory. I can't remember what the rule was, but so we just shift one or two members each time and pretend like it was an ad hoc thing and get a bunch of folks in there all the time who were, knew about these issues far more than most of the people in the interagency from USG did, and they could help on policy deliberations and stuff like that. So, so that's, I would say, it's all part of it, and anybody who's working on something should reach out as widely, as broadly as possible to ensure that you're bringing the best thinkers and most experienced folks into the thing, even when they don't agree with you, because the critiques can be really helpful. The way you brought up a lot of things, just so I'll try to bring just a couple things on the blood oil. I think, the dream maybe we share is the idea that fingerprinting the origins of some of these, whatever they are, minerals, raw materials, whether it's oil or the conflict, to be able to, and diamonds and stuff, to be able to narrow down for almost precisely where something is from, so you can include or exclude it on the basis of its geography and what's happening in those places. Again, they'll be cheating, but it'll sure reduce it dramatically. And I think my bigger dream is like someday, 10, 20 years from now, you're able to walk in with your telephone or whatever thing we're using at that point, and you walk into the store of whatever store it is, and you touch the product, and you just, here's where it's coming from, and here's who it's hurting, and somebody is impartially sort of telling you, and you can make that, it's much cheaper than this one over here that isn't hurting as many people. So, what the hell with those people? I'm going to buy this product. Or you're like, yeah, I don't want to hurt those folks, so I'm going to buy this one. You know what I mean? So I think, we're moving in a direction through all these disparate movements of trying to focus more and more attention on where things come from and how incredibly injurious those processes can be to the earth and to the people who live there. And so, the more there is this kind of level of accountability and then choice giving to the consumer. We may not regulate, you can only have it if it's not, if nobody or nothing is harmed in the process of making this product. They'll never do that, but at least more transparency is going to be, I think, key for consumers. But there's a lot more to say about that, obviously. But I do want to say one point about you had mentioned that the demand for these minerals is not in the U.S. and Europe anymore. I mean, where the cutting edge of it, because the bulk of it, because the level of cell phone use is accelerating more rapidly in Africa than any other continent, and that kind of thing. True in absolute numbers, but the high-end market where Apple and all these other companies make their money is in the more complicated products. The more higher-end products is where their profit margins are. It's where they get the bulk of their profits. So, no matter if the U.S. market was stagnant or declining, which it isn't, they would still be obsessed with this market more than anywhere else, particularly this demographic, because of that factor. People are buying the phones they're buying in the countries we visit, in Africa, are, for the most part, are the lowest end, cheapest, and can knock them off from, and sell them from the assembly line, and require no innovation and don't reflect any of the innovation that is sweeping through the industry and constantly updating itself. So I do think that the reason why these companies have hopped to so quickly and have fought it so harshly, especially the American-based companies, this is where they have to sell to make their serious profit margins. There's a great point about the social media and social movements. Again, this would be something we could talk about for a long, long time, but I do think that, yes, it's becoming, maybe this is what you're saying, but one could potentially summarize it and say it's becoming a little more superficial, that often people who are organizing on the basis of an issue and using social media, Twitter and Facebook and other things, one could, from the outside, look at that and say, well, many of those people that are participating in signing these petitions and doing all this kind of stuff may not know much, if anything, about some of these issues. Look at the great example that has been dissected as many ways as it possibly can be, the post-Coney 2012 phenomenon. But at the end of the day, people have time and energy to do what they can, and a lot of people have only enough time and interest and energy to like say, I don't like injustice. This particular thing really bugs me. I'm not going to sell all my possessions and go follow somebody who works on this thing, but I'm going to, when I get my chance, when I get the email that says I got to write this letter or sign this thing or whatever, they're going to do that. And if the critic would look at that person and go, well, that's not an informed constituency, I think you could conclude that. But what I think a lot of groups do in this sort of age of social media is they provide lots of options for especially young people. So if you're going to get involved, and so you hear something bad is happening, you get the summary, okay, I'm going to sign this petition or whatever you're going to do. You want to learn more, go there, go here. And then some people do and some people don't, and they get to go down the rabbit holes that they choose to go down. And the more interesting you can make those rabbit holes, the more they'll go down them. So I've never been sort of one of those that says, we don't, not enough people are caring about this stuff. Or I'm like, well, we got to just make our stuff more interesting because there's a lot of things out there and people are really busy. And if we don't really make it interesting, they're not going to. So, and the news media ain't going to help for the most part, because they're not covering it, or when they do, it's so, especially the major news media is so superficial and brief. So, it falls upon a lot of these non-governmental organizations, I think, to be able to educate the publics about these various issues that we all might care about. And so it's really incumbent upon them to create interesting avenues for people to learn about things, because again, they're just not going to learn about it through school, or elementary or high school, or through the mass media. So, anyways, there's way more to say about that, but I did want to make the one point, which is that this is a time when you look back to our sort of shared experiences in anti-apartheid stuff, or Blood Diamonds, and people, those that were, getting arrested or on the picket line or doing stuff, they might have really spent a lot of time trying to figure it out. There was no, what do you call it, there's no emails by that time. We were just, you'd learn as much as you can. You'd go into the library and go to what do they call it, the card catalog, and you'd find, like, you go through this, people are probably like, what is he talking about? You get the number, and then you go, like, hope that when you go into 2 stories away to find the book, maybe it was still there, or maybe somebody hadn't taken it or stolen it or whatever. And so, 50% chance. And now, you just can get it like this and learn so quickly. And so by creating these, if there's a problem, an issue, a cause, folks that are successful at being able to organize people for those causes create really interesting ways for people to learn about it. And a lot of that learning happens not in a controlled way. Like, we are going to give you this and this and this, and you will learn that, and then you can take this action. It's much more diverse and much more experiential, people taking their own decisions about where they're going to, what they want to learn and what kind of actions they want to take as actors in the context of social movements. Finally, a governance question. Well, you know, at the end of the day, I would say that with respect to the Sudan case, we have, the United States and many countries have sort of sat on the fence and tried to be somewhat impartial and said, let's try to help Sudan and South Sudan, or the opposition in Sudan, try to have negotiations and stuff like that, and this thing just bleeds on and on. And I mean, our sort of effort now to rebuild a new approach, now that we have a new Secretary of State, a new administration, a new special envoy will be named soon here in the U.S., et cetera, et cetera. We have a new chance to sort of reset. We want to focus much more of the U.S. effort, at least, on understanding better the dynamics of the opposition and civil society and the rebel movements, and figuring out how we can be much more helpful in building the capacity of the opposition and civil society in staking out the next steps of the change that inevitably will occur in Sudan. No dictatorship lasts forever, so how will the change occur, and how can those people be more? And we should be on their side, in my view. And that doesn't mean throwing arms. We aren't going to do it. That's just not going to happen, not for now, not with this administration. But we certainly can do a lot of stuff that can help build the capacity of these people to organize and to press for the changes that they see, the Sudanese people see as important for their future. And in Congo, you know, there's going to be a lot of different venues for this, but the peace deal that was, or this framework agreement that was signed by 11 states, including the Congo, that basically allows for two tracks. One as a regional negotiations process, and then one as an internal institutional reform process. That internal institutional reform process, which would deal with security sector reform, transparency, all the kind of things that people would argue are the kind of fundamental building blocks of reconstructing an effective state, which many people would argue is their main belief, the main reason for, the main driver of conflict, let's put it that way. And I wouldn't argue against it, I would just say it's one of them. And so putting a great deal of effort and energy from the international community into helping to facilitate the initiation of some kind of a national dialogue process that is not controlled by Kabila alone, that is more impartially facilitated, and or starting regionally and undertaking those kinds of dialogues about that are just inclusive. In other words, the process itself may not change it overnight, but acknowledging and bringing into these processes the vast majority of the Congolese people as they're represented through the institutions, political parties, civil society organizations, and other entities that represent more broadly and more deeply the Congolese people than the government itself does, I think would be the effort that I would want to see the U.S. be much more engaged in pressing and pushing. And we've been really on the sidelines on all this governance stuff and done almost nothing. And our only contribution is throw money at the electoral, these deeply, deeply flawed electoral processes, and sort of say, well, that's our, you know, and instead of building these institutions and creating inclusive processes that bring all the kinds of other actors who hold people accountable for all the things that people need to be held accountable for, but basic economic and political governance, human rights abuses, and all the kind of things that we care about. So that, in terms of governance nuts and bolts, I would say those are some things that the U.S. under Kerry and Obama could really do a lot more than they have been doing.
Great. Well, I just, before we close, I just want to mention the next Table Talk lunch series in K is this Wednesday, April 3rd at noon, and the discussion is Turmoil in Africa, U.S. Military Response. We have a guest coming from the Department of State, as well as two of our own, Dr. Fanta Ah and Professor Levan. So if you want to continue parts of this conversation, you should be in the K Lounge on a free lunch on Wednesday at noon. I want to thank you all for coming today on opening day. I appreciate your spending opening day here with us
I know,
this
boy,
afternoon.
oh boy.
And
My Royals are
John-
playing right now.
John, it's great to have you here with us, and we'll look forward to having you back.
Thanks.
Thanks so much
Thank
for
you
coming.
so much.